Hello YouTube, this is Frugal and here we are today with Yoko the Yoke, probably the single best product name for a flight sim piece of hardware I've ever come across. Now, Yoko the Yoke didn't originally start life as a flight sim yoke. Yoko the Yoke was first manufactured about 2 years ago for an aeronautical manufacturer who was a customer of Virtual Flight who make this, who wanted a yoke to control a 4-ton amphibious UAV, so obviously a UAV that can fly and also land and take off from water. So in that respect, this is not your typical flight sim controller. This is a proper, full, real controller for controlling a UAV. It just so happens that it works on PC. Anyway, this was sent to me about 6 weeks ago by Virtual Flight. I've had a bit of an opportunity now to spend some quality time with it and get to know it, so here is the full review. First of all, let's talk about construction. This weighs 9 kilograms. It is a hefty chunk of metal, and it is all metal. It's a mix of aluminium and steel, even down to the main yoke itself here being also, I think, probably steel, but with a plastic paint coating. The only plastic parts on this are these switches on the top and 2 switches in the front. Incidentally, those are the only switches you get. There is an elevator trim here, there is a rudder trim or even aileron trim here, there is an autopilot disconnect switch here, and a push to talk button here, and that's it. Again, not your typical configuration for a flight simulator controller, but more the sort of configuration you'd find on a real yoke, which this is. In terms of connecting to your PC, there is a single USB slot on the back. You plug a USB cable in, plug it into your PC, and that's it. Away you go. Outside of all the general aesthetics though, the first thing you're going to notice when you finally do bolt this to your desk, and bolting it to the desk, by the way, is accomplished with this clamp. It goes in 2 slots down here and then just screws up to the desk. The first thing you're going to notice is how smooth this is. There is a fairly, I'm guessing spring, I haven't taken this apart, but I'm guessing spring. There is a fairly heavy spring inside here, which means that as you reach the limits on the turn or pulling out the yoke or pushing it in, it starts to get very heavy. But prior to reaching those limits, it is incredibly smooth and very easy to adjust with fingertip control. Now this is going to be tricky to explain because you could easily adjust a Cytec yoke, for example, with fingertip control because the Cytec yoke is so very light. This is not in any way light. I mean, the spring in here is chunky. It feels very, very, very chunky and very solid, but that doesn't mean that you're forsaking finesse in terms of using this controller. The other thing you're going to notice is that unlike on any other controller I've ever used, there is no center detent on this. So the yoke will quite happily spring back to center as you move it from side to side, or as you push it in or pull it out. It will always return to center, and that's great. That's just what you would expect. But moving from left through center to right, there's no noticeable point at which you suddenly feel, oh, I'm in the center now. Every other controller I've ever used, joysticks and yokes alike, you know when that thing is centered because there's almost a detent, almost a point, a dead zone if you like, a point at which you feel, okay, I am definitely centered now, and now I need to apply force to break it out of center. Not the case with this. And that translates to a very smooth flight experience. For example, you can have the yoke pushed all the way in and full left and very easily and smoothly start bringing the yoke out and roll right, and you'll never hit that center detent. There's no clunkiness, no jerkiness, nothing. It is probably the smoothest yoke I have ever used. It is a really quite unique experience. Really, really good. Now, although the physical design looks very similar to the Iris Dynamics yoke, there is no force feedback or control loading on this. The focus of this yoke is really just on controllability and being very, very accurate and very, very high quality. So, how does this feel in flight? Well, I've got to say, actually really, really nice, although this bit is incredibly tricky to kind of report on. I went into this review looking at this because this has a high price point that we'll get to at the end. It has a high price point, pitching it very much in competition with something like the PFC yoke or the GoFlight yoke or something like that. So I went into it really comparing it in my mind to the GoFlight yoke, which I have a lot of experience with, to see if this was noticeably better or worse. And I couldn't draw that conclusion. I can't definitively say it is better than a GoFlight yoke or a PFC yoke or a Jet, what's that, Jet Systems, I think they do one. It is better than those, or it's not better than those. It just feels different. It feels very unique. It's nice and easy to grip this yoke. It has nice thin arms with finger grooves behind them, so your hands fit on it very, very comfortably indeed. And then, as I said, flying it is actually very nice. Although the spring is very heavy toward the limits, you can finesse the yoke. You can finesse the aircraft you're flying with just fingertip control very easily, making for some very nice and very smooth approaches and landings. In fact, it's precise enough before you start really twisting it to its limits that you can very easily fly an aircraft with this, landing, take off, whatever, with one hand, which is ideal. As many of you know, when you take off in a jetliner, for example, you have one hand on the throttles, one hand on the yoke. You're going to be able to do that just fine with this. It's not a problem. Now the switches, I was concerned going into this that a lack of switches would be a problem. For example, I like having a switch that I can use to recenter track IR. The fact there are only 4 buttons on this, 2 trimmers and then 2 physical buttons, had me concerned that I would start to feel limited by it somewhat, but I really didn't. And I was more than able to set up a button on my keyboard. And the fact that the top of this is so flat and nice means it's very easy to put a keyboard or another controller on top here to get to those not very often used buttons, but essential ones that you need while flying. Now the next point to bring up is the weight of this. It weighs 9 kilograms, as I mentioned earlier, and it bolts to your desk with this clamp. Now the issue is the clamping point here, you can see here, is not very extended out. You would typically extend this arm out and put the clamp, say, about here to give you a lot more grip, a lot more torsional strength, I think it's called, when it's gripping, so that there's no flex or anything like that. The fact that it's so close to the front of the bracket though means that it can't exert very much force on your desk. I tightened this as much as I possibly could without risking shattering my glass desk, and even very, very tight, the yoke would still move if I pulled the main handle out, the main column out to its limits. The spring in here is so heavy that it easily overpowers the 9 kilogram weight of the main unit, and this was not strong enough to hold it on my desk. You'll see in the video that the couple of times where I tried to demonstrate moving this to its limits, I actually had to reach out and hold it on the desk. Now that's not a big deal, but it is something to be aware of. And the reason it's not a big deal is you very rarely, most of us very rarely, do any flying where we would hit the maximum extension of the yoke for the elevator. You know, if you're pulling back that hard on the yoke, something's gone very, very wrong. But you are going to hit that limit when you're calibrating it, either in FSUI PC or in the Windows USB game controller calibration. So bear that in mind. So what do I think about this? Well, I'm going to put this into 2 parts because I haven't mentioned the price yet. First of all, just the yoke on its own, without even worrying about how much it costs or doesn't cost. Seriously, stay tuned. I gotta say, it is probably, I was gonna say one of the best, it's probably the best yoke I've used on my desktop. It really is. It doesn't feel like a toy. There's a nice solid amount of resistance from the spring, but not so much resistance that you're fighting it. It's very easy to fly very precisely and smoothly with this. I love how much extension there is on this yoke for the elevator. It's got more throw, I think, than any other yoke I've ever owned, which is great. It is incredibly precise as well. I'm not sure what sensors they're using inside here, but it is very easy, as I've mentioned a few times now, to finesse an aircraft down onto the runway. To the point that, you know, I see a lot of people on videos, and I've done it as well, really manhandling a yoke on approach, throwing it in and out and twisting it side to side. You really don't need to do that if you have a really well set up yoke, and this would be that yoke. So I think in summary, it's an incredibly good yoke. It is probably one of, if not the best yokes I have ever used. But it retails for 820 euros, and they ship door to door with FedEx exclusively, which is 90 euros given the weight of the package. They do package it very well, by the way. It arrived in pristine condition, very well insulated. There was no risk at all of this thing getting in any way damaged, and it did travel all the way here from Barcelona, which is a feat. But 820 plus 90, you convert that into dollars, it is over $1,000 to get this yoke. And that's just the yoke, no throttle quadrant or anything like that. So I guess the number one question that people are going to have about this is it worth it? I honestly hate that question. You know, if I have 10 cents in my pocket, is a $1 candy bar worth it? No. If I have $2,000 in my pocket, is a $1 candy bar worth it? Yes. It really is. Worth of something is really a factor of how much disposable income you've got and just how much money you are willing to spend. What I will say is I found no negatives at all with this yoke. None at all. You know, I could easily look at a Cytec yoke and say it's too light, it's too flimsy, it's plastic, it's a toy, or it's a game controller. I could look at a GoFlight yoke, for example, and say that the mouse pointer really should be a hat switch, that the 2 buttons on the front really should be independent. There is nothing about this yoke that I could put down as a negative. Sure, as I mentioned, this clamp could be better and sturdier at holding it on your desk if you put in some violent movements on the yoke, but by and large, you never will, so that doesn't matter. Overall, there is nothing wrong with this yoke, and as I said, it is probably the smoothest yoke I have ever used. So is it worth it? Up to you. If you have a budget of $1,000 to spend on a high quality yoke, I would highly recommend this one. It really is absolutely amazing, great build quality, wonderful precision, a beauty to fly with. If, however, you don't have $1,000 and it's a question of handing over a credit card or maybe even saving up the money for it, I don't know. I don't think there are enough features on this to differentiate it from some of the competition like GoFlight or PFC, so it really is going to come down to personal taste and personal preference. Leave me a comment in the comment section below and let me know your personal opinion. Do you think 1,000 is just in general too much to spend on a flight simulator yoke, or what defining factors would you look for in something at that price level? As always, my name is Frugal. Thank you so very much for watching, and thank you to Emilio over at Virtual Fly for taking the time to send me the Yoko the Yoke. I have to get the name right, Yoko the Yoke, for review. It's been very enjoyable. I'm actually not looking forward to sending it back. I do like it a great deal. See you soon. Once again, my name is Frugal. Thank you so very, very much for watching, and thank you to Emilio over at Virtual Flight. I have to check the name every time.